that happening on the web. And the reason we're seeing that happening on the web is that brand is very important on the web. So if you think about the American market, for example, and you live in Topeka, Kansas, well, you've got your local newspaper. But if you want print news, who else might you think about? Well, you might think about the New York Times. So in some ways, the local paper competes with the New York Times. If you're the New York Times and your audience, do they ever think about the Topeka newspaper? I doubt it. So in some ways, brand matters. And so we're seeing a concentration of audience around those brands. The money has not quite kept up with that movement of audience. We still haven't quite figured out how to monetize for a really solid business model online news consumption. But that's coming, and I think that will be there. And then we'll have a number of these news outlets, like the New York, like nytimes.com, that will have the revenues they need to do really solid, substantial, ongoing reporting. Of course, the New York Times does it already because it has a different kind of tradition. It has a much bigger newsroom. But I think we'll probably see 6, 8, 10 of these fairly substantial news outlets 10 years from now on the internet, really competing, and competing over the quality of their journalism.
Thank you. I think we can move on to a question related to the issue that Boston Global Forum will focus on next year, namely the role that social media can play to create a better, safer, more peaceful world. And we have a question from one of our collaborators who couldn't be with us tonight. And he's wondering if you could talk a little bit about the emerging role of, emerging, it's already a pretty established role that social media plays in the news cycle, and how that fits into the knowledge-based news that you advocate for.
Well, I think social media at this point are overrated in terms of what they mean for public information. We've got a lot of data that indicate that much less news traffics through social media than the proponents of that as a news source would have us believe, that less than 1% of the social media traffic has anything to do with news and current affairs. If you look at the internet generally, visits to news sites are a very tiny proportion, at least in terms of what we might think. It's maybe 3% of visits are to news sites. So, I think the social media are going to be an important part of this process. To me, the social media are much more important in getting people engaged in public affairs, getting them energized, getting them mobilized. The social media do that much better than the traditional media. What they're less good at is informing people about the events of the day. That's the traditional strength of the traditional media. The average person isn't equipped to do that. If there's a knowledge deficiency among professional journalists, I can't even begin to think about how deep that knowledge deficiency is among the average person who might go and use Twitter or Facebook to try to tell someone else about what the world looks like. So, I do think there's a place for the professional, but I also think there's a place for the amateur, but I think they play somewhat different roles in our information system.
So how do you see us as Boston Global Forum then with our focus for next year on the issue of social media? Sort of, do you advocate for a model where we look at social media as a tool to build a movement, but then we need to have a substantial background that has that sort of skeleton to withstand and to hold the ideas together that we're trying to advocate for? Or are you saying that social media on its own, it doesn't amount to much?
No, I'm not saying that social media on their own don't amount to much. I think social media are very good at building community. And I think that's the goal of Boston Global Forum, is to build these communities around these issues. Are we fixed?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
To build communities around these issues, to attract like-minded people into discussions, deliberation on important subjects like social media, like the fate of third world garment workers and the like. I think that's different than day-to-day journalism. And I've been talking, and almost all of my remarks have been about day-to-day journalism and where I see the weaknesses. And as far as social media are concerned, I don't really see them as a substitute for the news organization. But that doesn't mean that they don't have important roles to play, and there are roles that they're much better at. The traditional news media that's mainly a one-way communication process. They're not all that good at building community, and they're certainly not very good at connecting people with one another. The social media do that very well. So, I think if we think more broadly about these different outlets, these different kind of media, then I think we can see where they can make different contributions to democracy, and to come together, each in their own way, can strengthen democratic life.
Yeah. So if you were to give 2 or 3 concrete ideas or suggestions for social media to play that role, what would they be?
One is simply to get people talking to each other. There's a book of a colleague of mine, Bob Putnam, wrote, called Bowling Alone. And it's basically about how we become more and more ourselves and more centered on ourselves. And it started, in some ways, it started with television. Television took people off the streets and into their homes and put them in front of their television sets in a very passive kind of way. And the computer can do the same thing. Computer games can do that. But these technologies can also be ways of connecting us. And that's the beauty of the internet. Sure, it's a way to spend a lot of time alone, sitting down, looking at a screen. But it also increases our capacity to reach out to others. So I think one of the most important things about the social media is its social element, the fact that it connects us. Another thing that the social media can do, better than others, is really to get us activated. Because we end up, when we get connected on the social media, and there are opportunities that present themselves, they can be communicated quickly. You can see others are engaging in it. You don't feel that, I'm kind of alone in this and I'm not sure what my contribution means. When you see lots of other people doing it, with crowdfunding, for example, and you see the amount getting more and more, or if you're in an election campaign and you see the kind of the range of volunteer activities almost just taking off exponentially, that sends a strong signal about what you can do with the social media. So I think there are lots of places where social media can strengthen democracy, but it's mostly in community building. It's mostly in getting people involved. It's mostly in terms of getting people together.
Thank you. Yeah, we're killing your voice here. I guess we can have room for one last question, which comes also from another collaborator of ours who would like to know what are your next ideas for research and books. What do you have in mind to focus your attention on next?
Well, that's a good question, because I'm up in the air a little bit about what might be next. I have 2 or 3 ideas. Let me just run 2 of them by you. One of the things, and these 2 are related, one of the things that troubles me about the governing situation currently in the United States is the difficulty of getting people to work together. And that's been more a problem among our political leaders than among our citizens, but it's happening on both levels. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the great American historian, wrote a book in the middle of the 20th century called The Vital Center. And I think to some degree that's the part of American politics that's been weakened and that we miss. So one of the books I'm thinking about is, what do we need to do to restore the center? to make the center stronger against all of these centrifugal kind of forces around polarization that are taking place. And then a second book, kind of on the same subject, but more kind of directly within my personal kind of tradition, writing about the media, is to look at the media's role in party polarization. I think one of the most important challenges we face in the United States is this polarization between the two parties, the distance, the growing distance between the two, and the deadlock that we see in Washington as a result, and some of the hostilities that we see at the level of citizens because people are in such radical disagreement on what government ought to do and what direction we ought to take on particular issues. And I think the media are a contributor to that problem. So I'd like to look at it more carefully, to study it in a way where you could think about, okay, here are the things that you're doing deliberately, and you can't do anything about those. We certainly have media outlets that are deliberately fueling the polarization. But I think there are practices that are taking place in the media that indirectly, unwittingly, are also fueling that polarization. But to make that argument convincingly, you've got to demonstrate it.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on Boston Global Forum.
No. And yes, thank you so much, Professor Tom Patterson. This is the first program of Meet Boston Global Forum Leaders series. And exciting. We are honored for December 12th, birthday of Boston Global Forum.
Tuan, you are my great friend, and I'm glad you're sitting beside me for this first interview. So it couldn't be a better organization, and it couldn't be sitting next to a better friend. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your attend and listen and see us today, and we hope have chance to serve and to meet you in next programs and next series from January 2014. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right.
Okay, so it's in business. We're done. We're in business, Tuan.
Yes.
We had a little setback in the first few minutes where we had the microphone muted.
So they could see me.
Where do we stop this? There you go.